Hi, this is Chris from Orange Coast College's Art Department, covering part 2 of our Dragon Egg assignment to use photo texturing on some simple forms. Now what we're looking at here is where we left off in part 1, which is most of our major forms lit with our lighting. Let's take a quick look at that. So where our key light, fill light, rim light is coming from. We'll work with the colors later on. And we're pretty much ready for texturing the major forms. So I want to start initially with probably the easiest thing to do, and that is right in the foreground on the table under the box is going to be a map. So let me bring that in. Okay, here's our map, and what I want to do is put this in perspective initially. So I'm going to spin it, and what I want to do is essentially put the corners on the corners of the line drawing. So I'm holding down Command right now so I can get this. And I want to essentially match up where this is going to go. When I feel like I've got the right perspective, I'm going to go ahead and hit the Enter button, and then I'm going to bring this down below the bowl and under the box. I've got a couple layers turned off so that I can see what I'm doing easily. Let me turn them back on. And now you probably notice it's standing out like a sore thumb here. That's okay. I still want to do a couple things to it. I want to apply a little texture on top of the graphics and then adjust the color and lighting on the scene so it takes that in. Let's bring in some of our paper texture. What I'm looking for is to just get a little bit of a indication that this has been sort of folded and crumpled a little bit. Okay, now I've brought in some additional texture. First I'm going to take the color out of it by desaturating, and then we're going to do the same thing we did before. So I'm going to do a little free transform on it, try to match the perspective. And then multiply that a little bit and darken it up just so we can start seeing a little bit of that texture. All right, so we got a little bit of folded and a little bit of rumpled. And in the end, I'll probably want to adjust the silhouette of that page so that it looks like that it's not a perfect polygon. And then lastly, at least for now, let's go ahead and change the blending mode of the original source image to soft light. And that way it'll pick up a little bit of that shading from the tabletop. And we can go in and adjust that later. It's also a little saturated, so I'm gonna drop in a hue saturation adjustment and just drop the saturation a little bit. Probably want some of that color. And then let's do a quick group. That color adjustment we'll probably want to tweak at the end when we're adjusting colors all the way around. So that's a really easy way to drop in photo texture. So I've got an image graphic, and then I've got a couple texture layers. And there's multiple layer blending modes for texture layers, but for the most part, because this was in shadow, I just wanted to make it darker. So I used the multiply for my texture, and I used soft light for the image itself to inherit some of that lighting below. All right, so there's the first easy one. Let's move up and take a look at the eggs next. Okay, so let's bring in that texture. And I think this is the one I want to try out on the egg. And oops, it went right into my clipping layer group. So I'm going to move it out. All right, let's go and find our eggs. Here's egg number 1. And let's start with that one, learn what we can, and then apply that to the next 2 eggs. So I'm going to turn to my Finder window, and I'm just going to drag a texture in right here. And let's go ahead and get the texture about the size that it ought to be. Somewhere maybe around there. Good. Now, that came in as a smart object, so I'm going to go ahead and rasterize this. And then I'm going to put it over my egg and option click the line to get a clipping group. Now that's okay, but it looks like an oval of 2D texture. So there's a couple things we want to do. We want to inherit the lighting, and then also we want to warp the egg. So let's start with the egg warping. Now I'm going to go to transform, warp, and what this enables me to do is grab handles and really apply the sort of radial foreshortening that we'd want to have. So I want to make it really bulge in the center here. And I want to have it foreshorten as it goes up and out. Sometimes you really got to push and pull this a few times, because we want that nice big square. In the center, and then we want it to be pretty tight as we get to the edges. Stretch this a little higher. All right, now we're starting to feel a bit of that foreshortening that we want as it gets around the edge. So when I feel like I've got it the way I want it, I'm going to hit enter. First, a few more tweaks. Just want to get that wrap on the sides. Now we have it pretty much the size and spacing that we want, so I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. Now I'm going to probably want to look through a few layer blending modes. So let's start with soft light. It's okay. Hard light, even better. That might be our winner. Try overlay. That one's okay. Let's compare. We're picking up some desaturated highlight, which is good. But I think I want to pick up that hard light. And that way we get some of that shading that was on below. I think also I'll take this opportunity maybe to throw in a levels adjustment layer and drag our whites over. So here I'm adjusting actually the shading so we can get a little bit more of that light. Don't want it to look too artificial. So something like that. That's nice. Okay, now I'm thinking about color, and let's check in with our source image. So here's our screen grab, and we do have a green, which this one's looking okay. It might be a little too metallic. And then we've got sort of a lighter red and then a reddish brown. So I think we're going to end up probably dulling this green and skewing it. But I think for now, as a placeholder for green, let's go ahead and leave it. And then let's reuse this texture a couple times. So I'm going to duplicate that texture and bring it down to our copy. And I'm going to want to shrink this. But we're going to bring him over there. Let's go ahead and clip to the group, but let's get the scale small. So it definitely feels like it's the next one down. I want to get as much of that foreshortening as possible, so I'm going to move the texture over. All right, looking good. And just so we remember which color is which, I'm going to go ahead and add a hue saturation and just kind of swing the hue on it to remember that we want it to be kind of red. We'll want to lighten that up eventually as well. All right, and we want to do this one more time for that last egg. Whoops, that was not what I wanted to do. There we go. And sizing the texture. All right. So in each case, the texture gets smaller as we go down, and we probably want to, again, for now, throw a hue saturation adjustment. All right, These will need further adjustment, but I think we've got what we're looking for now. Okay, I think the next thing we want to do is take a look at the table, since that's a pretty wide area. And I'm going to try dragging in this wood plank. I'm going to hit enter for now, and then let's clear out some of these things. Let's clear out the candles, let's clear out the egg crate, let's clear out this guy. And now let's do a little free transform on our wood table. Just want enough to cover the table as we've done it so far. That looks like that might be a good amount. All right. And let's check some blending modes. Hard light's looking pretty good. Might want to darken the cracks a little bit in this table. And then where we've got the map, let's go ahead and mask the wood out from here. So I'm going to select the map, I'm going to invert the selection, and then on the wood table, I'm going to make a mask there. All right, let's turn the candles back on, turn the eggs back on, and see where that leaves us. We'll probably want to shade that a little bit darker when we need to, but for now, that's good. We can make lots of adjustments later. All right, so we've got some table texture. Let's look next at the box. Now, the box from the TV show is, I think, far too ornamental for this exercise. So I think maybe what we'll do is start with a basic wooden box, and if we need some more decorative items on it, we can add that over the top of the wood. So I'm going to look for some wood texture that may be a little bit more refined than the table and apply it to the major surfaces that we see. I think that might be a little too stripy. And even when we throw it on a multiply blending mode, I think it blends a little better, but it's still a little too similar to that table. So I want to differentiate it a little bit. And while we're thinking about the table, I think we want to get a hue saturation adjustment on that texture, just so it's not so punchy, and that way we can not be thrown off so much by it. I'm going to darken this guy back up again. And we'll be able to change all the hues of these woods, but still I think a little too close. So going back to that sample of the wood box, I'm going to go look for another texture. And I think this time we'll take this guy, drop him in, and see how we do. So again, I'm holding down Command when I'm in free transform, and that allows me to pick up some corners and move them around. Now let's throw this guy on multiply mode. And that's not too bad. So I think that might be a little bit of a tighter grain, a little more contrast to the wood table. Let's keep that idea going and drop in another one for the side. And this time, let's rotate it once around so we're not matching the front side perfectly. There we go. We'll throw that on multiply, and we'll use the left box to clip it. I think that's looking all right. So I think what we're going to want to do is apply that to the rest of the box lid and the box top. On the inside, I think I want to put maybe a leather texture on the top of the lid, inside top. And let's do that one fast. So I'm getting that same wood texture and moving around the whole box top, applying it to each surface and making sure each one is in perspective. Now that's super important because the average viewer can tell when things are off, and the most common thing that I find off in student work is perspective. So we want to make sure that we keep textures in perspective, and we want to use foreshortening when we've got cylinders and spheres when we get to the edges, because that's also another easy giveaway that you're just planting some texture mapping on without the care of really integrating it. So here I'm finishing up with some interior of the box textures and just adjusting the lighting so that we can still see them. And very last, on the top edge, some final adjustments, and that's about it for the box itself. Now we're going to take a look at adding some decoration. It looks kind of plain with just the wood, and I don't want to do as much decoration as the original show box, but I'm going to put a few metal corner brackets on the edges of the box with some rivets, and I think that can give us an opportunity for a change of material and texture. So here I'm just giving some shine to some beaten metal, and then I'm going to find some textures for it. So first, a scratched metal texture, and then let's take some rivets from this second texture, and this takes a bit of transforming, so foreshortening, putting in perspective, clone stamping out, and extending the texture a little bit, reversing, flipping, and moving it around, and then finally some additional shading and shadowing to integrate it. Now let's do an emblem on the front of the chest here. So this is the Targaryen sigil, and applying some textures to it to give it that sort of hammered metal look. And then we'll do a layer effect for bevel to get some lighting to make it appear as if it's got some raised dimension to it. And then finally adding a little drop shadow. Now we're working on the banner in the back and applying a canvas texture to it. I want to have sort of a coarse texture that's legible, and then taking the sigil and transforming it onto the banner itself. So making a mask with the magic wand and changing some layer blending modes. And lastly, a little wood grain on the banner post. Now moving along to the bowl of blood in the foreground here. So going back to the hammered metal texture on the outside and the inside, and a little bit of a brushed metal on the sort of cut at the top. Now here I've found a bowl of blood in a photo, so I want to mask it and insert it about where we would see it inside that bowl. Adjust some levels, put it on a blending mode that works out well, and we've got it. This next phase, I want to move on to the candles themselves. So here I'm applying some color in color blending modes and just adjusting it slightly per candle so that they don't read all exactly the same. As it is when you do a color blending mode, there's a little too much sameness there. So anytime you can incorporate some additional colors, it's useful. Now here we've moved on to the candle holders and giving some texture to the metal and a little bit of color and kind of experimenting around to see what sort of combination of metals will look good for the pillar candle holders. So this doesn't look great at the moment, but we still have another phase to come back and retouch. Here we're adjusting the grain of the table, putting a little grain on the edge of the table, and now moving on to the very background plane. You might have noticed in that original I had a stone knight or a crusader kind of scene you might have seen in the crypts. And I kind of like that look for a deep background. So I found that, and I found some block wall, and I just want to get it in perspective and scale, knowing that it's going to be pretty dimly lit. So coming back to the table, I'm not too satisfied with it, so I want to apply a gradient map so that the lights of the table have a warm yellowy orange light, and the midtones and shadows kind of have a more burnt red brown color to it. So returning over and over and adjusting the gradient map. And finally I found something that I like. Here I'm applying a gradient map to the hammered metal decoration on the front of the box, and now we're adjusting the profile of the egg. So we've got some ins and outs on the silhouette, and I just go back to that base layer and erase and add. Since it's a clipping group, all the color and texture will adapt by just adjusting that base layer. So erasing the gaps, adding to the parts that stick out. Now we're just putting in a little more shading so they separate. So now we're adding a little bit of highlights in the back on the stone knight, just to get a little color pickup on some edges. And now an overall color adjustment going through the whole illustration and adding some warm yellows near the candles, some orangey reds near the foreground where we've got out of frame a torchiere with fire in it to get us a little bit more reddish light. And lastly, I haven't been super happy with the wood on the box, so I did a second overlay for some wood complexity that is a little more dinged up. So in combination with that really perfect initial wood, I think it comes out to, you know, a good textured wood. So again, just some fine tuning, going around adjusting color, adjusting value, and trying to make sure that our reads aren't competing with each other, that we've got the first read, second read, third read. And I think that's enough retouching for now. I think we get the general idea of what's going on. There can definitely be a lot more integration between objects, but I think for now this is a good example of the techniques that we want to work on. Pick your level of scope that you can do for this assignment and go get them. Make some great art.